Well, when Paradox came out, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with it because I did kind of say that it's a continuation of the Key, and the Key was a moment in time. You know, that when that album came out, death metal was pretty new. Nobody had used keyboards, extensively in death metal, and we did, and we kind of got labeled as that. So that album had very high expectations after it came out, and it did very well. So when I went to do Paradox, I didn't know what was going to happen. Were people going to like this, or were they going to hate it? And Paradox came out and it did really well, and people were saying it's the perfect successor to the Key, and I was like, oh, now I got to beat that. And that's the thing with when you put out a good album, and then your next album, you really got to challenge yourself on that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Trendcrusher podcast. I'm Peter K, aka Trendcrusher. As you would have seen in the title of this episode, it's death metal again. And I was fortunate enough to speak to Mike Browning from Nocturnus AD. He's been part of many other well-known bands in the past. I was real honored to speak to him and get to know more about their latest album, Unicursal. Before we get to my chat with Mike Browning, I'd like to play a track from an Indian metal act, Moral Putrefaction. Now, the band portrays death metal against the backdrop of India's political and socio-economic landscape. This weekend, their self-titled debut album releases, and the band have described it as challenges prevailing narratives, delving into the complexity of India's diverse cultural landscape. Here's the track from it, Divided. And that was Divided by Moral Putrefaction. Do check out their album when it's out. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes. Pre-order it. It's been a while since I've heard some good death metal from India. Now on to my chat with Mike Browning from Nocturnus AD. Here it is. Hi, Mike. Welcome to the podcast.
How you doing, Peter?
I have to say this up front, and I don't normally do this when I'm doing an interview, but it's so great to speak to you and, listening to your music across like decades, so to say, right? It's very few times that I get a chance to do this. So first of all, it's a huge honor and pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I know I've been doing music for so long, and it spans a lot of different bands and times and all kinds of things. But so it's great to. I mean, I would have never thought at 60 years old that I'd still be doing this, but here I am.
And that's awesome, right? Because we're talking a couple of weeks before the release of the latest Nocturnus AD album, which is titled Unicursal. How does it feel, first of all, to be doing press? I mean, like you mentioned it, I didn't do the math, but did you actually think, like, while prepping this, oh my God, like there's been decades of me doing these and the evolution of doing press overall, right?
Well, I mean, I think about it every morning when I get up and and I'm like, I'm still alive. But so yeah, but yeah, it's weird. And this is I'll be 60 this month, so the album comes out about a week before my birthday, which is kind of neat. And so yeah, and I would have never thought at this age that I'd still be, especially playing death metal. That's it's a weird thing to think about. And this is probably one of the heaviest things I've done as far as albums. There's a lot of stuff on this album, heavy and dark, and there's a lot of elements on this, so it's kind of cool. But I think every time you do a new album, everything that you've done before goes into it.
Yeah, and that's one of the few things I definitely want to touch upon, right? Because like you rightly mentioned, right? We're talking in 2024 death metal. I grew up in the 90s soon after the heyday of metal, and just like listening to that entire sound, I think from 91 to 4, or actually even like 86, 87 to 92, right? Just before like the entire grunge thing. The amount of music that came out there and just the sheer volume and the quality was, and you actually lived in that heyday in Florida. I mean, that's literally considered the hotbed off where that entire sound came out. No, so I said, how do you kind of look at that evolution? I mean, especially considering now you're seeing various bands. I mean, like I mentioned to you earlier, right? Like I grew up in India, and for us, access to that music was not so much. So by the time we finally got hold of it, and if you think about it, all of you kind of spawned a different sound, and but now around the world. Does that kind of dawn on you sometimes when you think about it?
Yeah, it is strange to think of how many, like back in the 80s, how it was compared to how it is now. Because when I first started doing metal, it was just metal. Everything was metal. There wasn't death metal, gloom, all these different sub genres of metal. You didn't have doom and technical death metal and black metal, and you didn't have all these different things. It was basically everything was metal. So I used to go see Savatage when they were more metal than they are now, of course, because they kind of changed their a little bit more to almost rock. But in the beginning, Savatage was metal, like really pretty heavy metal stuff, and there was a lot of bands. Nasty Savage was doing stuff. So that was the kind of stuff I started seeing that, and I was kind of doing my own thing at the same time too, and knowing, I think because we had a good little scene here and those kind of bands that were actually getting really popular already, it kind of helped everybody else.
Awesome. So I want to kind of fast forward to present day, and we're talking about Unicursal. I read in a previous interview that this album was actually written collaboratively with the band. Looking
Yes.
back, if you had to say at those sessions, what kind of impact did it have on the final product that everyone's going to be hearing very soon?
I guess just more diversity in the songs. Even Paradox was a lot of collaborative effort, but our keyboard player Josh, he had just joined the band when we did Paradox, so he didn't really have a lot of input on that record. But when we started writing Unicursal, we wanted everybody to put in as much as they could come up with. Like we'd go into the practice room and I would look at Damien, our one guitar player, and go, "Hey, throw out a riff." And he would throw out a riff and we'd work on it. Then I'd look at Belial, our other guitar player. Okay, now you throw out a riff, and we'd match those two riffs together. And so every song was built in the rehearsal room by everybody that was there. And a lot of bands will have like maybe their guitar player writes everything and he comes in with it all recorded and maybe on a drum machine and okay, here, learn this. And we don't do that. We get in there and we build a song from nothing, basically.
I mean, some people would call it old school, but I've realized even with like so-called old school bands, it's the entire approach you're talking about, right? Where someone brings in a riff and says, "Hey, I had this idea," and they kind of work on it. Uh, I think, like at least now with technology being so accessible, I've heard of like band members in different parts sharing like Dropbox links and stuff like that. Uh, but I want to quickly talk about the actual music, right? One of the things that I read through the interviews and also the press note that I got with the album said that four of the songs actually continue the story from Paradox, and that actually goes back to the key. Is it safe to then assume that the story was already there and then you all wrote the music? Like, how does that kind of work?
Well, it was a little bit of both. I think I knew that where I wanted to go with the story, especially from well, the key, when we did the key, it just ended up being that the last four songs kind of made a story. The first two, with like Andromeda Strain and Droid Sector, weren't really connected at first, but then when I started writing Destroying the Manger, I thought, well, let's make this a little closer to a story. And then when we did Empire of the Sands, the last song on the key, we purposely made that the next song after Destroying the Manger. So the first two are kind of loose, but they kind of go together, and then it kind of gels a little bit more by the end of the album as four songs. So when I decided to do the band again, Nocturnus AD, I wanted the biggest thing I wanted to do was continue the key story. And we didn't do that on Thresholds because I didn't end up singing on Thresholds, and everybody wanted to write, which was okay, but it just kind of, we didn't continue anything from the key onto Thresholds. And I didn't want to have the whole album be a concept because that could get kind of boring. So I thought, well, let's just take the last 4 songs, just like what happened on the key, and do that on Paradox. And that way, the first half of the album, I can write whatever I want, lyric wise, and then that. But the thing is, with our band, we always write the music first. So sometimes we'll have 4 or 5 songs written, and I haven't even touched the lyrics yet. So, but what I do is I have a bunch of song titles, and I'll come up with a song title in my head. And when the song title comes into my head, I almost have like the whole story already in my head of how I want it to go, what I want to happen in the song, or what I want it to be about. So what I do is we probably, I think we had 5 or 6 songs already written for Unicursal. And then what I did was I took the song titles that I had, and I said, what, like, say this title, which song sounds like this story that I want to write. So I'd pick the song out, and then I'd start writing the lyrics to match the song. So I know a lot of bands probably don't do things that way, but it seems to work for me quite well. So I like having a few songs to choose from, and then I'll look at my titles and try to figure out which song, the music wise, fits the lyrics that I want to write for that, the topic, I should say, that I want to write for that song.
Okay, that sounds like a very interesting approach to have. If we had to play, a song from the album right now, what would you say, and just to flip things around, was that first song that you kind of knew that, hey, this is going to be the song that'll, you want people to kind of say that, hey, this is Unicursal, this is the Nocturnus AD track on the album, like that sound?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think right now I would say it, and my favorite songs have kind of changed on that album because there's so much different stuff on there. We released Cephalogod first as a video, so I kind of thought that would be like a good song to start with. But also, we just finished a video 2 days ago for the song Hode, the Stellar Light, and that's going to be coming out. The video will come out May 16th, and the album comes out May 17th. So I think probably a good one to play now would be Hode, the Stellar Light, because we have the video coming out for it. And the video is all CGI, no AI, but CGI of Dr. Magus, and it's basically telling the story of the Hode song, of him traveling into the tree of life in the, it's like a huge, like the album cover, it's a huge tree of life floating in space, and he goes into each sphere and kind of conquers what each sphere stands for, and then he collects another like sigil for each sphere, which is like, the thing in his chest with the pentagram and the lightning bolt. That one basically is for the earth. So with the lightning bolt striking down and hitting the earth. So that one, and then like Yesod is the moon. So that one's got an upside down pentagram and the moon, a quarter moon. And so Hode is Mercury. So it's got the upside down pentagram with the planetary symbol of Mercury in it. So that's actually like a sigil that he's got to kind of pass the test and do these things in that symbol. The symbol, or the portal for Hode, is basically a portal he goes into, and then he's got to kind of conquer what that portal and that sphere of Hode stands for, which it's kind of like intelligence, ideas, thoughts, your brain, basically. It's conquering that. So once he does that in the video, then he receives the sigil, and then he can move on to the next sphere.
Wow, this sounds so fascinating. I'm definitely going to double tap or get more into the concept of the album right after this. So for all of you who haven't heard it, here's Hode, the Stellar Light.
you sowed and hoed. Intellectual path of the sun, the higher level of intelligence, the path of personality to the higher self, splendor of the material world, secret of the human intellect, perfect grace of the active realm, deforming the visual mind, initiation of personality, the great source of inner life, gathering collective intelligence as the energies are symbolized. the mind. Using material tools, carrier of the idea. I am the chosen disciple to master the universe.
And that was Nocturnus AD with Horde, the Stellar Light. And I'm talking to Mike, the mastermind behind the band. Now,
Right, Peter.
you talked so much about the concept and everything and went into so much detail. I have to go back and step there. What was the first time that you kind of got fascinated with a topic like this? Because it's very clear that this is something that is you're deeply entrenched into and interested in, right? What is that first moment you got into like science fiction storytelling of that sort?
Well, it's kind of like always been there for me. When I grew up in the 70s, so there was a lot of science fiction stuff, and even being a little kid in the 60s, the biggest thing that every kid wanted to be was an astronaut. So back then, that was the thing. Yeah, that we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have anything but books and TV. And the TV was very limited. You had 3 or 4 channels, and that was it. So stuff like the moon landing and things like that, they're huge. They were huge. Every kid wanted to be an astronaut. So I loved science fiction back then, and then I also loved horror films, because most people like horror films anyway, but science fiction is a little bit different. Some people like it, some people don't like it. But I always liked stuff like Planet of the Apes and all the sci-fi movies that came out in the 70s and things like that. So to me, it was kind of a progression of this and then that. And then I started reading books on things like, the Necronomicon. I found the Necronomicon and I read that and I was like, wow, because I did like H.P. Lovecraft. I read some of his stuff early on, and I thought his stories were pretty crazy. And then when the Necronomicon came out, it was all linked to Lovecraft, and I was like, wow. And then I started reading stuff also like occult stuff, like I had the Satanic Bible, like most kids did my age back then, and it was a big thing. And so I started branching out more and more, and like the Kabbalah. I like the Tree of Life, but not from a religious aspect, from more of an aspect of what the Tree of Life does. Can be a lot of different things. It in a more Western tradition. It's more about what the 11 spheres of the Kabbalah stand for, and if you look at it, it's like a big filing cabinet, and you can put all your life experiences into one of these files. So I started reading a lot of books on that, like Dion Fortune. She's got some really good books on the Kabbalah, and there was another book I read called the Kabbalistic Tarot, which actually took the tarot cards and aligned them with the whole Tree of Life. All the paths between the spheres are also tarot cards. There's 22 paths and there's 22 main tarot cards. So I started reading on a book on that, and that really fascinated me, how it all like worked together into one big system. So I thought that it'd be kind of cool to take Dr. Magus and have him run through that system and go through each sphere and kind of conquer it.
Wow. Like I said earlier, you're definitely deeply into a lot of these topics. Something I was curious about, and I definitely wanted to throw this earlier in, is when, of course, Paradox was first announced, a lot of people were like, whoa, that was something I think, especially considering it came like the time it did. How did the response to Paradox have your kind of have an impact on your approach that you took to Unicursal this time around?
Well, when Paradox came out, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with it because I did kind of say that it's a continuation of the key, and the key was a moment in time. You know, that when that album came out, death metal was pretty new. Nobody had used keyboards, extensively in death metal, and we did, and we kind of got labeled as that. So that album had very high expectations after it came out, and it did very well. So when I went to do Paradox, I didn't know what was going to happen. You know, were people going to like this, or were they going to hate it? And Paradox came out and it did really well, and people were saying it's the perfect successor to the key. And I was like, oh, now I got to beat that. And that's the thing with, when you put out a good album and then your next album, you really got to challenge yourself on that. And I think if I was to do too much of that and not add the rest of the band into the writing process, it probably wouldn't have been nearly as good of an album as it was, because like our keyboard player, he plays drums, he plays guitar, he can play a bunch of different instruments. So when he joined the band, it added a lot. And so having Unicursal and everybody chipping in more and more and more just made it more diverse. Like, so everything I do was there. Everything Belial does is now there. Everything Damien does is there. And Damien did a lot of the writing on Paradox too, as far as the guitar stuff and everything like that. And so did Belial, but it became more of a collaboration with Unicursal, and like every song is literally just like one riff from this person, one riff from this person. We got parts from the keyboard player throwing in. He'll play a riff on the keyboards, and we'll put guitar and drums to it. So, and we never did that before on Paradox. So, we've added that into it now, and we have a new bass player, Kyle, and he's going to start writing, with us on the next album. So the next album is going to have even more influence of writing, of diversity in writing.
And you kind of walked into my next question, is the lineup, right? I mean, we have to kind of address that. You're the mainstay of the band over the years. How do you feel that like each member kind of fits in? Because you talked about their writing, but music is just one aspect of being in a band, right? I always ask band members is how much of a marriage is it, right? Because you're jamming, you're doing stuff, but there's other times you're also together. How has that kind of relationship been in you getting new members into the band?
Well, Damien and Belial have been in the band for like, since After Death, before even Nocturnus AD. And so we've been playing together for 13, 14 years. And just like anything else, a marriage is two people. And you know how hard a marriage could be for people to get along for that long of a time. So bands have their ups and downs, but we really haven't had that many. And I think we get together and we try to have a good time when we practice and not be too serious, but we got to be serious enough to write a good song. But we also have to be friends in the aspect to where we can come in there, because a lot of albums, like you said earlier, can be written across the world. Like this guy will write a piece and send it to this guy, and then this guy will add his piece and then send it to somebody else. And that has no it's you can still write a good song that way, of course, but it's different when everybody is in that room together and working together as somebody coming up with a riff and recording it and sending it to somebody else to add something to it. I mean, we're doing the same thing, but it's different when you're in the room with everybody right there. Because even though Damien might come up with a riff, we'll still work on that riff, and I might say, "Hey, chop it this way instead of that," or "Do you like this drum beat more than this drum beat?" Because if he just sent me a riff and I put drums to it, it's done. But in the room there, if I can say, "Do you like this drum beat better or this drum beat better for this riff?" and he can answer me back, and we can go back and forth and make something a hybrid of what it first was even. So the ideas are way better when everybody's in the room and working on it, like a bunch of chefs in a kitchen working on one recipe. So like this guy's going to throw in this and this guy's going to throw in this. It's going to be way different than if you just read it from a book and make it.
Okay, so this is a question I've also been very curious about, and I wanted to ask you when the initial interview was set up. Is like we mentioned at the start, right? You've been playing metal for 3, 4 decades now. You've been writing, performing with various bands. What would you say has stayed consistent through all of them about you?
Um, I guess just the ideas that I have as far as the kind of topics I like to write about hasn't really changed a lot. I think over my drumming, there's a lot of new styles of death metal drumming that's come into play, and I still like to play the way I like to play, and like you got gravity blast and all these different kind of beats and stuff that people are doing, and I'll do some of these things here and there, but I still kind of stick with my own style of drumming that I've always done by myself because I never really took lessons, and I always just went from the stuff that I heard. I mean, I did some school band marching stuff, but that when it comes to the drum set, I didn't take lessons. I just kind of taught myself. So I kind of like to stay in my pocket of what I like to play, and even though like a lot of drummers want to compete with being the fastest or doing this or that faster than this person. I do not like competition in music. There competition should not be in music. Originality should be in music. So I think people need to be original and not compete with each other. When you're competing with somebody, you're doing what they already did, but trying to beat that. And that is not what music is about. Music is about writing something from your soul, and that is completely original. It should be an original idea, and it should come and be totally creative. Not well, everybody has influences, of course, but I don't want. I mean, I love Merciful Fate or Slayer, but I don't want to steal their riffs and sound like them.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that. Less than a week ago, I watched Suffocation perform, and
Mhm.
they played in India. This was their second time around. And if I
Oh,
got a
nice,
chance to speak to them, the only question I
great band.
wanted to ask them is, hey, how does it feel that when you go to like countries like Indonesia and stuff like that, where they've basically taken that entire sound and then you've got like thousands of band playing that exact sound that you guys have, right? And it's crazy when you think about it, just how much like bands like even yours has kind of like influenced generations of music.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely true. Some people they hear a band and they go, I want to play just like that. I want to sound just like that. And that's never been me. I love to listen to music and get ideas and little things here and there, but I've never said I want to sound exactly like this person. And that's to me is something that I never wanted to do, and actually strived to not sound like other people. And I think that makes a big difference. And I understand both ways. There's definitely people, like I love this, and I like Rush a lot, but I still can't play like Neil Peart. I don't, and it'd be nice to be able to drum like that, but I can't, or I don't, or but that's not me. I'm not Neil Peart, and I don't, it'd be nice to be him in a way, like be able to play like that. But I'm comfortable with what I do, and to me that's enough. I want to stay in my own pocket and kind of do things from that angle.
Actually, I want to chop off what you said in this previous answer and just kind of play that to every young and upcoming band because I think that's like advice all of them should definitely adhere to or just hear when they start out. Now, you've mentioned this
Yeah,
a
I
couple
don't
of
think
times. Sorry, go
the
ahead.
kids, a lot of kids these days, though, they won't listen to that. you know, they, that that people are so different now. Their attention spans are like a snap, bam. It's like this. I like this band. This is my favorite band. Then next week, no, this is my favorite band. Then next week, no, this is my favorite band. I I I still listen to the old stuff that I listened to when I was a kid and growing up more than I do anything new.
Which also kind of brings me to that question. I mean, you mentioned two separate things, so I want to kind of join them together. You talked about, the new drumming techniques. I'm definitely sure that you're listening to some bands, current bands at the moment or current releases. So let's get a mix of both. What's something current you've heard and that caught your ear? What's some of the stuff that will never leave your playlist?
Well, like stuff that would never leave probably would be like, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, the original stuff that I grew up on. Uh, I'm going to always be able to throw on a Black Sabbath record or Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, the old Iron Maiden, especially that kind of stuff, and go right back in time. And there I am again, thinking of these things. And so for that kind of stuff, it's always going to be better than anything else. And I've heard stuff that musically now is just phenomenal. And I'm like, wow, how do these guys even play like this? But that's not what I want to do either. But I can appreciate it, of course, and understand why they want to do it. But that's, like I said, that's not me. So as far as that kind of thing, I don't know. Bands like Blood Incantation and stuff like that, I really like. A lot of the new stuff that sounds in that kind of vein of metal that's coming out. There's so many new bands that I can't even think right now how many I hear all the time. People send me their demos and or albums and or a link to it on YouTube and hey, check out my new stuff. And I'm like, wow, some of the kids these days, their musicianship is amazing. And it's like, wow, I could have never done that at that age. It's stuff I can't even do now. But it's a different kind of thing. I think kids' brains these days are a lot different than they were when I was growing up. Things were much simpler. You didn't have to uh like learn crazy techniques and things like that. What you played was fine usually. And that's, to me, that's what I kind of, like I was saying before, I kind of stick with just doing what I like to do because I don't want to have to work too much to play a song. I want to enjoy the song. If I'm killing myself to play a song, then I'm not enjoying it. So it's kind of like I still want to be able to enjoy playing and not have to beat myself up to be so fast. I mean, I'm able to play kind of fast, which is good enough for me, but there's people that like are just incredible. And I'm like, man, they must have spent so much time just being able to do this one thing so good. But I'd rather like be able to play a whole bunch of different weird stuff than just one thing really fast.
Yeah, and I think it's also important, like what works for the song overall, right? I mean,
Right.
it's great to play fast. It's great to be the fastest, like shredder or whatever. But like, does it actually? Do people want to enjoy it, or do they enjoy when they listen to it? Uh,
Yeah, I
p-
mean the songs from even from the 70s and early 80s, they were really songs, they were songs and they brought emotions out a lot of times in you. And a lot of the new music, they're songs of course, but they're so technical and crazy, and that'll bring out emotions too, no doubt, but it's a different kind of thing. It's like I've always gone back to of a song being a song, and then you also can structure things and be really crazy and do that too. But a lot of times when you start doing too much of that, you lose the song, and it just becomes a bunch of riffs that are technique, and there's no song left in it. It's all just, look at how fast I can do this, or how crazy I can stretch my fingers and do this much, like 50 notes at a time, and or I can blast it, 300 beats per minute. And it's just like, okay, but that's not a song. A song is something that when somebody hears it, it makes an effect on their life, and they the next day it pops back into their head. Now that is something that to me is more of a where I would go with music.
You kind of just put very nicely what I feel about the state of technical death metal at the moment. It's a bunch of riffs, there's a lot of pop, but there's no song. Uh, Before we get kicked out, I would definitely want to ask you a couple of questions. Uh, what's next for the band? I mean, I'm sure there are some live shows or tours planned. What can you tell us or share with the listeners at the moment?
Well, the problem is with most of us have jobs and stuff, so we can't do long tours. But we try to pick really good shows and festivals that we can play. And we had a bunch of stuff going, and things were going really well. And then when COVID hit, of course, everything just came to a big halt. And while that was going on, we went ahead and wrote Paradox. Anyway, well, I mean, we wrote Unicursal because when Paradox came out, COVID hit like right after it came out, and we
Yeah.
had festivals planned and everything was stopped. So we kind of didn't worry about playing live at all, and just went more for writing the next album. And our label does not have time limits on what we do, so they're just like, just put out a good album, and don't worry about time. And so that's what we kind of did with that. So we're definitely going to do some shows and festivals, hopefully festivals, because those are the good things for us to be able to do. Because you could do a festival and play in front of a lot of people with a lot of different bands, and you can do it over a weekend. Basically, I could,
Yeah.
take one day off of work and be in Europe and playing, and then the next Monday be back at work. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of interesting to be able to do that. You can't do that with your touring, but I can't take weeks off at a time. And a lot of us in the band can't do that either because we have lives. So the touring thing is kind of out for us doing big tours, but so we try to pick really good shows or small festivals or big festivals to where we pinpoint these things and do them during the year. That way we still stay relevant and play live, but it's not killing ourselves out there on the road 6 months out of the year. And so what was the other part of the question? I
Oh, I
forgot.
said just in terms of what you could share at the moment,
Oh
if
yeah,
there were
yeah.
any announcements.
Also, we're gonna be actually we talked about this last night because we practice on Saturdays. We're actually gonna start writing some new stuff already.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we want to keep writing because we have our new bass player, and we want him to contribute. Where he's a really good bass player, so it's we want him to start contributing to the songs, and we're kind of excited about having 5 people now in the band that all are ready to write new stuff. And to me, that's I love writing songs and making songs, and to me that's the best part of it, I think. And so we're already talking about, let's start working on the next album.
Awesome. So I can do this, I think, all night, at least here in India. But any final words you have for all the listeners of the show?
Well, I just want to say thanks for everybody for listening to me for as long as you have. And you're not tired of me yet, so that's a good thing. And I'll do it as long as I can. And the album comes out May 17th. We have a new video coming out May 16th. That's really cool, and I think people will like that. And it's not AI; it's CGI.
Nice.
So everybody's hating on AI right now. So
Exactly.
I don't it. I can take it or leave it. It's a tool. If you can use it or it doesn't matter. But I think I didn't want to do another thing with AI because our first video had some of that in it, and people said stuff about it, and it's so stupid because we didn't just type something into a computer and it made the video. We played the song like 20 times and recorded it, and then had the whole video edited just like a regular video, like we're talking now. Okay. So basically, it's the video's coming out on the 16th and the album's
Damn it, Zoom. That was a great chat with Mike Browning until Zoom kind of cut it off. Yeah, we lost track of the free plan. If you enjoyed the single I played, do check out the rest of Unicursal, and I'm sure if you're a death metal fan, you will enjoy this album. As I mentioned in the end of the past episode, last weekend was particularly heavy when it came to some quality releases. So I've got another interview with a band that released an album last weekend. That's going to be out in a couple of days, so stay tuned for that. As always, follow me on the podcast platform that you're listening to this episode on. If you are on Spotify, do leave me a rating. And if you don't enjoy doing that, follow me on social media platforms. Just search Trendcrusher and stay tuned to when the next episode's out. See you all in a few days. Cheers.